some latecomers just coming in. Thank you to the people watching from home. I'm Kat Neelan. I'm the political editor here at Tortoise. And joining me today is Jess Phillips, Labour MP for Birmingham Yardley. She spent her career working with victims of domestic violence and was, until recently, Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding. She recently told The Times she is not a troublemaker, but that depends on your definition of trouble. John Curtis. So John Curtis is Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University and Chief Commentator for what the UK thinks and what Scotland thinks. He is also President of the British Polling Council and, in the words of Playbook, the Gandalf of UK polling. I'm told also I'm not allowed to call him a pollster. So, and Matt Warman... It's not my words. Matt Warman is Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness, formerly Digital Innovation Minister, and more recently fighting the good fight for the One Nation Tory caucus. Has refused to join Mark Francois' Five Families or Kemi Badenoch's Evil Plotters WhatsApp group, so is in the minority of Conservative MPs that's actually backing his leader. So tonight's session is talking about making sense of the polls and where we think the election will be won. Essentially, are all constituencies made equal? So I want to start by talking about, there was another poll released today showing a kind of continuation of a theme, which is Labour way ahead of the Conservatives. Today's was Labour on 47 points, the Tories on 29 points. I thought quite interestingly, both parties are up. Labour is up by more, 8 points to 3 respectively, but the smaller parties, the Lib Dems, Greens, Reform and so on, have all fallen. So I kind of wanted to ask John why he thinks that might be the case, if we could start there.
Best guess is the random variation to which all polls are potentially subject.
Great. We're starting with a high.
Rule number one with reading in polls is that you should look at the general trend, not get caught up by particularities. But it happens to be true that one of the rules about the reporting of polls is that the exceptional polls get publicity, and the unexceptional ones that are probably closer to the truth are the ones people tend to ignore. That's just to do with the way journalistic news headlines are generated. The crucial, there are two things essentially crucial to take away from the polls at the moment. One is that the Labour Party are on average 20 points ahead, and that at 25 points, the average level of support for the Conservative Party is still as low as it was in the immediate wake of Liz Truss being removed as Prime Minister. In other words, so far, the long-term impact of Rishi Sunak on his party's popularity is zero. The second thing, however, to be aware of is that there's quite a lot of variation around that 20-point average figure. So I can find you some polls that have, Labour around, 27 points or so ahead. And there are others who say, no, it's not much more than around, 14, 15, 16. And where the truth lies between those two things, is much more debatable. And we might want to get into this, but maybe or maybe not, that could make quite a difference to what the outcome of the election would look like. But, the one thing that all the polls do tell us is that basically not, with one exception, which is, leaving aside today's poll, the rise of Reform in the last couple of months, really virtually nothing of long-term significance has happened in the last 15, 16 months.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously when campaigns start, often we see those polls narrowing.
Well, again, you have to be very, very careful. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, right? Okay. And because people keep on saying this, I actually went back. Now, of course, to really look at where we are now as compared to the end, you've got to look at those elections that took place towards the end of a term. It's no good looking at those elections where the Prime Minister decided to go after 4 years because he or she thought they were going to win. That inevitably creates a biased sample. What you discover is that, for example, if we take the 92 to 97 Parliament, which is the one that everybody's focused on, because there seems to be some remarkable number of analogies to the current situation. Actually, the Labour lead over the Conservatives 10 months out was exactly the same as it was when John Major eventually called the election. The lead did narrow during that campaign, but not because there was any dramatic revival in Conservative support. It went up by 1 point in the 97 election campaign on average is because Liberal Democrats took some votes off the Labour Party and therefore the Labour lead came down. But, I know you can go the other ones. Sometimes it narrows a bit, but frankly, other times it doesn't. There is no guarantee either in terms of what's going to happen between now and when the election is called or between what happens during the election campaign. Frankly, some of it will depend on the ability of this gentleman and this lady and their respective colleagues to campaign effectively. Okay, all that one can say so far is that this gentleman's colleagues have not been terribly effective at campaigning in the last 16 months, whereas Jess's lot at least have quite graciously taken the bonuses that the Conservative Party have offered them during the course of this Parliament.
So one of the things that was asked in this poll was how many people think it's time for change.
Yep.
And 7 in 10 people are now saying that it is time for change. But that said, there is still a sort of lack of enthusiasm for it being specifically Keir Starmer. They're very clear on it not being the Conservatives anymore. What do you think Labour can do to change that? And is it a problem for you if it isn't, if Labour is simply the anyone but Conservatives party?
I think historically that has, I was raised under I was raised by, very, very left-wing socialists.
So that means you're feeling now uncomfortable about your party you're in?
No, because I am a pragmatist who likes...
20 points ahead in the poll.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm like that. Who held their noses and, to be fair, not in my dad's case, and voted for Tony Blair to be the leader of the Tory party. The Labour Party. It's been a long day. I've been on committee talking about sexual exploitation all day, excuse me, because they wanted to win. And the idea that you don't... I think most people in the country don't necessarily vote for what they want. They vote for what they don't want. And that's certainly what I was raised with. So I don't personally worry. Do I think that the nation is about to wake up tomorrow in a time when faith in politics, although we keep saying this, faith in politics has never been lower, was it ever really high? I don't remember a time in my life where I've just been like, woo! Politics totally serves us all the time. I don't think that we are in a space where people are going out with masses of hope for anything but change. Change is the hope that you can provide, the possibility of something different rather than the concrete of something different. Because, I feel like there is all this constant, people don't like Keir Starmer, people think that, they're not voting for Keir Starmer, they're voting against the Tories. I think that was always the case. People didn't love Boris Johnson. They just really didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. Boris Johnson is the luckiest man, and no doubt about it, Keir Starmer is a lucky general. I'm not saying he isn't. He's a lucky, lucky general. But Boris Johnson's, all of his many, many electoral victories, he was gifted with terrible opponents every single time. And, the Labour Party is currently opening that gift.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I would like to come back to that point in a minute, because I think it's probably more on a seat-by-seat basis as to whether you voted for Boris/Brexit and against Corbyn. I think that's probably a kind of sliding scale. But
except my seat was 62% Brexit and voted for me in a massive increased majority both times after Brexit.
Okay.
But I'm an excellent MP.
So, Matt, time for change. Obviously, Rishi Sunak has tried to position himself as a change candidate and is now talking about sticking with the plan. Is the plan as it was the 80-20 strategy, as in you defend 80 seats and try to get 20 new seats? If that is still the strategy, do you think it is a realistic one?
I think John's reaction might have look, CCHQ's plans are CCHQ's plans, and I honestly don't know is the short answer. But I think, obviously, as any campaign goes on, you adapt what that looks like. And individual MPs will obviously take their own view. There are people who would have been wanting to be in that 80-20 because they wanted the additional support that comes with it. Inevitably, some people start to look closer to elections and start to think they want some of that help. But look, I think the main point about all of this is that there are broader factors around. Politics is to some extent cyclical, right? It is not simply the case that you win elections or lose them by virtue of the campaign or anything else. Some of it is about that time for change narrative, and the Tories did remarkably well in '92 to have turned that around. That, I think, is clearly where we want to be in the cycle, and the fear from some of the polls is that we're one election on from that. But to be honest, the polling is not the interesting thing about this. No one goes into politics because of polling. They go into it because they want to tell stories and they want to change things and they want to fix things. And you would hope that that narrative can shift the polls, and that's what we should be doing.
I mean, that's certainly the argument being put forward by David Davis.
I feel like I don't need to
article
be
today,
here, and John just doing much.
I think there is a sort of hefty amount of scepticism about whether that's possible. I want to, if it's possible, obviously, when we talk about the polls in this kind of context, we talk about it from a national perspective. But clearly, what motivates a voter in, say, Surrey Heath is different to what motivates a voter in, say, Stockport or, whatever. So what, if any, conclusions can be drawn from this kind of wider sort of narrative of a 20-ish point lead? And do we need to sort of drill down more into the individual constituencies to kind of see what's really going on? John?
Well, the short answer to your question is if when you've got a 20-point lead, and assuming that's roughly accurate, you don't have to worry about the geography, right? We're not. I mean, indeed, I would. But coming back slightly also to picking up your previous question, I would actually change the title of this session. I would suggest to you the title should be not "Where will the election be won," but "Where will the election be lost?" I mean, to come back slightly on what Jess was saying, that basically. You can talk about cycles, but the truth is this has been a very peculiar parliament in which the electoral position we currently find ourselves seemingly is the product of simply 12 weeks in the last 4 years. Those 12 weeks come in 2 6-week blocks. Block number 1 is the 6 weeks immediately after the first revelations about Partygate, in the wake of which the Conservative Party lost 6 points in 6 weeks, the Labour Party went up. And the second 6-week block, yes, you can probably guess, it's the Liz Truss premiership, where again the Conservative Party lost 6 points in 6 weeks. And basically, apart from that, nothing has happened. And the truth is that those two fundamental mistakes are the primary reason why we are where we are. Again, I mean, sure, Jess would not mind if I remind everyone that until December 2021, the government was never consistently behind the opposition in the polls. For the first 2 years, this was a remarkably electorally successful government. But two absolutely fatal mistakes. One is a more liberal interpretation of the COVID regulations than anybody else in the country understood. And then seemingly not being honest about what happened, and eventually, indeed, Boris Johnson's peers, not once but twice, decided he was not being honest about it. That was fatal number 1. And then fatal thing number 2 was to crash the markets over a dash for growth. And no government in the post-war period that has presided over a fiscal financial crash has survived at the ballot box. Yeah. So you can see why it's doubtful. Now, the reason why I talk about lost is this. I mean, some people were surprised at a certain poll that appeared in the Daily Telegraph about 10 days ago saying the Tories would only get 160 seats. I have to tell you that my reaction was 160 struck me as rather generous.
Yeah.
But if you looked at the edits of that poll, which I've done. Now, you can download the data. You can see what's going on. You can see what's going on, and it's not the only poll to show this. I can show you another 30,000 poll that was done last spring that shows the same thing. You can look at the local election results last May, and the really bad news for the Conservative Party is that its vote is going down most heavily in the places where it was previously strongest. In other words, the more Tories there were last time, the more their vote's going down this time. And in part, That's just simply an arithmetical inevitability. The Conservative vote is at the moment 20 points down, according to the average of the polls, from where they were in 2019. There are around 70 constituencies where the Conservative Party did not get 20% of the vote, even in 2019, and where therefore they cannot lose 20% this time. And therefore, it's bound to be the case they lose their votes more heavily in places they were strongest. It's what happened to Liberal Democrats when their vote crashed in 2015. It's also, by the way, what happened to the Conservative Party in 1997. And if you go through the YouGov poll, you can see this is exactly what they are picking up. And again, we've also already had evidence in the ballot box. You may remember at around just almost a year back from now, the Conservative Party in advance of last year's local elections was saying, oh, Rawlings and Thrasher are saying we're going to lose 1,000 seats. Oh, no, it's not going to happen. Absolutely impossible it's going to happen. You know, we're doing better in the polls than they were assuming. The Tories lost 1,000 seats, even though the Labour Party didn't actually do that well. Why did they lose 1,000 seats? Because actually, while the Conservative vote held up on what was a pretty poor baseline in spring 2019, their vote went down in places they were trying to defend. Ergo, they lost 1,000 seats. So that's the first reason why the Conservatives have a problem. And this is what opinion polls will not pick up, and which the YouGov MRP poll does not pick up. It's the risk that voters will vote tactically against the Conservatives in the places, according to who is second. Now, the truth is, it won't happen on the scale that's been happening in parliamentary by-elections, where it's mammoth because basically if Liberal Democrats look as though they're going to be the principal challengers, Labour don't fight and vice versa, with the exception of Mid-Bedfordshire, okay? But in the local elections, again, you can see this is going on. It's not dramatic, but it's the order of around 3% of people who might otherwise vote Labour voting Liberal Democrat and vice versa. Yep. Now, if you add that to the pattern of the Conservative Party losing ground more heavily in seats that they're in. If the average of the polls is right, and that's a big if, you could talk about the Conservatives at around 120, 130 seats. It would be their biggest loss ever. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that is the spectre that at the moment potentially faces the Conservative Party. If the polls are at least roughly right on average, and if the geographical patterns that we are not only seeing in polls, but we've already seen in local elections follow through. And again, one has to say, some of us have been doing this game too long. In local elections before the 1997 general election, you could see exactly these patterns playing out in local elections, both the Tories losing ground more heavily in the places they're previously strongest, and also anti-Conservative tactical voting. And it exactly then played out in 1997, which is why the Tories ended up, 165 seats or whatever it was, right? That's the problem that the Conservative Party now faces now, which is why they really, really badly need to achieve a recovery. But so far they have failed to do so, or more accurately, they were beginning to recover until last summer. It couldn't succeed as a group voting for the Privileges Committee report on Boris Johnson. And whatever progress Rishi Sunak had made in the polls up to then disappeared in an instant. Because again, one of the things that the Conservative Party needs to understand is that if it's going to avoid being the instrument that is the butt of the electorate's wish for change, one of the reasons why the electorate wants change is because they want to be led by a party in whom they think they can invest a certain amount of trust in terms of what they say. And the problem is that the word that is associated with Boris Johnson in the public's mind is liar. And the Conservative Party badly needs to distance itself from that. And it failed to take the opportunity last summer.
Kick him out the Tory party. That's what they should do. Kick him out.
I mean,
kick him out of the Tory party.
They've thrown out Jeremy Corbyn, so why can't you throw out Boris Johnson?
Back on. Yeah, I'd kick him out. I mean, you can't do that because Mark Francois will literally, die crying. The 5 families.
I mean, he doesn't even arguably need to chuck him out. He could sort of make a more sort of fulsome statement, kind of distancing himself from both Boris Johnson and...
Yeah, but Rishi Sunak opted not to be in the House of Commons when the Privileges Committee report was before the House. And that, in my view, was a fatal mistake.
I mean, it seems like that's kind of it. We'll just finish the session there and let's walk off. But there's got to be more to it than that. I mean,
there is definitely more to it in constituencies, but anybody who, like, basically I jokingly said my constituents vote for me much more because I'm a brilliant MP. It's absolutely not true. I am a brilliant MP, but you can rely, most members of parliament can rely at the very most on like 500 people being part of your push it 1,000 if you're good and well known. Yep. Push it to I'm from Birmingham, and Birmingham Edgbaston is a really, really good example of a seat that was classically Tory, was kept Labour when the tide was Labour, and actually Geezer Stewart then managed to, on the basis of a margin. In the margin, it will matter if you're a good MP or not. Like, it will matter, and actually, you can win because you've got someone's Nana council house. You can win on that basis. It's not corrupt. Like, you were just helping them. You didn't get it over somebody else. But any politician, including Boris Johnson, who thinks that they are like it's for them, is on an absolute hiding to nothing. Nothing I will do, and the year before I decide I'm going to stand down, I have committed to standing in an election where I do absolutely nothing. I'm not going to knock a door. I'm not going to put out a leaflet, and I imagine the result will be the same. And bear in mind, I don't have a Labour seat. My seat in my lifetime has been Tory, Labour and Liberal Democrat. It's been all of those things. Slutty, that's what I like to call them. They shop around. And once you've had a marginal seat, you feel like you always have a marginal seat. So I will campaign in my seat as if I don't have a massive majority, which I currently do. But I am under no illusion that when the tide turns against my political party, for whatever reason, actually, in my seat, they hate the governing party. My seat hates the people of government. They hate the decisions being made.
Yeah.
So they voted Lib Dem when there was a Labour government. Yeah. They voted Tory. Actually, they didn't mind the Tory government under Thatcher. They voted, but demographically it's slightly different now, and also the boundaries are slightly different. But they're not keen. They like the outlier. They like the opposite of the reality. They like a rabble-rouser. So... But the idea that any of it is to do with the individual geography, Johnny's absolutely right. The tide is the tide. And it doesn't matter how many take bets I go to.
I mean, the truth is, if we were looking at an election in which there might be quite a small swing away from the government,
you'd be working
those 500 votes can be crucial.
Absolutely.
There will still be key battlegrounds. It's just that they will be of a much different order to the ones
but the key battlegrounds will be places that we never thought of key battlegrounds. I mean,
Hastings.
I always remember the 1997 election campaign. I well remember Channel 4 doing a constituency profile going, hee-hee-ho-ho. Well, here's Scarborough. Hey, the polls tell us the Labour Party might win Scarborough. Hee-hee-ho-ho. This is absolutely impossible. This seat has never been Labour. The Labour Party won Scarborough. In other words, at the moment, the battle lines are going to be in constituencies of Tory MPs who thought they had a job for life.
Well, you're sitting next to one at the minute. It's got one of the safest seats in the country, 25,000 majority. Are you nervous?
So, when I won it in 2015, it was the seat that UKIP was supposed to win. It was a surprising 4,500 majority. So my attitude to it has always a bit like Jess has always been to say, look, you're an idiot if you take this stuff for granted. You shouldn't be doing this job if you take it for granted, but that's almost a separate point. And if I look at that vote, then 44% of people in 2015 voted for me, 34% of people voted for UKIP. Wind forward to 2019, at 79% voted Conservative. All that tells you is that the electorate is incredibly volatile and you can't take anything for granted. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the basis on which any sensible person would be fighting the election.
So Frank Luntz last summer warned warned you and some of your colleagues that anyone that's on a seat of 15,000 or less should be worried. I mean,
all right then, aren't you?
You're okay, but a lot of your colleagues aren't.
What's your percentage majority?
The majority is 62.
Yeah, so
majority.
You've got a 62%, right? Well, look,
You'd probably be all right.
I think your colleagues who have somewhat less safe seats might be looking to you to help them out.
So I think there is obviously always a question of where do you stay at home and do you help yourself or do you go and help colleagues? Now, obviously, it's only one individual or one campaign team, but I think you are seeing people like Frankland's trying to scare people into action, right? He's not saying that gleefully. He's saying, look, come on, guys, you've got to make an effort in seats where you maybe thought that you didn't need to make
absolutely.
an effort. And that I think is a noble cause, right? He's saying that because he wants the Conservatives to be the party of government, and I think there are all sorts of good reasons for that to be the case. But he's doing it because he wants to scare people into doing it, and that I think is a good thing, and that does have an effect.
To be fair, Morgan McSweeney in the Labour Party does that too. He's just constantly like, we're not going to win.
Is it not complacent by any chance?
Yeah, there's
party conference.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I come from a sort of slightly like dour, always be cynical Irish background, and maybe Morgan McSweeney is just who works for the Labour Party in this area. Maybe he's just living embodiment of my father. He's definitely not the living embodiment of my father. But yeah, this idea that you should take it for granted and that you shouldn't fight every seat like it's a marginal seat, even the ones that you think are really, really safe, is undoubtedly the mantra of the Labour Party.
Yeah, but I guess, to me, the interesting question now about where the Labour Party are, it partly comes back to the question you asked earlier about how much enthusiasm there has for the Labour Party. To be honest, the Labour Party, for most of this Parliament, has seemed to play basically a safety-first strategy, to say relatively little. And there is no doubt that on most of the criteria by which you can compare people's evaluations of the Labour Party now, before the 1997 Parliament, the Labour Party is in nothing like as strong as a position vis-a-vis the enthusiasm of the electorate. But you are going to face, I mean, let's, for the purposes of argument, I mean, but it frankly doesn't matter who's forms the next. Let's say for the purpose of argument, assume that your party is going to form the next government. I mean, in comparison with 1997, you are going to face a dreadful situation. We have maxed out our credit card.
We
have record levels of taxation. We have record levels of spending. But the public services don't work and the economy is flatlining, all right? Therefore, the problem, the potential, the thing, therefore, I think if I were Labour Party at this stage, I'd be going, well, actually, is it worth beginning to try to bind the electorate in a bit more, perhaps it being slightly riskier this side of election, on the basis that if we don't do that, after 18 months, unless his lot engage in fratricidal warfare, you are going to find yourself in a very, very difficult situation. Look, so in other words, it's almost now thinking about, well, actually, do we now need to be a bit more upfront about what we're going to do so that we are not at risk of being in a situation where we end up seemingly breaking our promises or doing nothing or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a big dilemma, I think, facing your party.
I totally agree with you, but then that's the kind of politician I am. I am crash bang wallop, and I would definitely take more risks. And Keir Starmer's approach to this is clearly the winning one at the moment out of the two of us. So that, like, undoubtedly, but I actually think that the electorate, who, like, you know, obviously I speak to all the time, not just in my own seat. I was in Tamworth for what seemed like an interminable amount of time, and everybody from Tamworth is from Birmingham, it seems. We didn't have local elections where I was, so I spent the entire sort of 4 months in Stoke, and they are not without realistic understanding that it's going to take time for the start off, that things are so broken that things are going to take time. They are not without realism and or the desire for nuance. But I agree, you need to show a bit more leg, but it doesn't have to be like 3-word slogans, we're going to deliver this overnight. It needs to be, the idea of change is we're going to be honest about the idea that it's going to take a long time and you're going to have to take part in it, whether that's with taxation and or
but let's take one example. Let's take one example. The IMF today has said basically it would not be responsible for the government to cut tax further. And indeed, if you read the OBR report, its reaction to the NIC cut was, that is brave, Minister. Now, The risk you face if, as so far, you seem inclined to accept whatever tax cuts Jeremy Hunt comes up with, is that you will A, find that the fiscal situation you're in is not sustainable, and B, you will end up reversing those tax increases, and therefore you'll end up with the opprobrium after the election of having broken your promises.
That opprobrium is one I cannot live with. Do you know what I can live with? Is that nobody once ever in all my years, and I've been knocking doors since literally as long as I can remember, my main first memory was campaigning for the Labour Party. I went to Women's Liberation Playgroup to give you an idea of how long I've been campaigning for the Labour Party. No one has ever once on a doorstep ever said to me, I want a tax cut.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we came upstairs. There's been a couple of times.
Really
never.
So you talk about different constituencies.
Mm-hmm.
You go to, so I'll routinely talk to Labour MPs, like no one ever says stop the votes as a thing on when I
literally. The only person who ever raised it with me was once in Stoke, where he said we need safe and legal routes, and I thought I was being filmed. I thought I was being filmed for candid camera. I'm not even joking. I was like, "Where's the camera, mate?"
But this is the thing. Like I talk to someone like Jess, like almost like you don't believe, but I can tell you 100% in Skegness in Boston, people will raise spontaneously in immigration. They will raise spontaneously
taxes,
the tax burden. They think that they are being that they are paying too much for public services.
Oh, they think that. Oh, don't get me wrong. My constituents think they're paying too much for a bag of shit.
Yeah,
it's the bag of shit that's the problem, mate, not the taxes they're paying.
Exactly.
But it's both. No, I simply don't.
They'll pay. They're like, I don't mind paying, love, but I ain't getting. You know, I used to pay this amount, and I could get a dentist appointment.
So I think it's an interesting thesis, but it's not what people say to you.
Well, look, okay, you're talking about Peter, but let me give you a piece of, slightly more substantial evidence, all right? And it is a fascinating question about where we are at as a society, okay? So British social attitudes has been tracking attitudes towards taxation versus spending for the last 40 years. So I well remember, by the way, before the 1997 election, the Labour Party say, these guys tell us that the public are more concerned about the public services than they are about the level of taxation. We don't believe them. Eventually, 2 years into office, the penny dropped and they increased public spending, right? Okay, so now, but of course, the public are fickle. And once Labour had got the waiting times down in the health service, it improved schools, particularly in London, people then said, hang on, you're taxing us too much, all right? In other words, until now, when the state has been expanded and it's taxed more and it's spent more, after a while there's been a reaction.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing about what's happened in the wake of the pandemic, which of course has been the biggest increase in taxation and the biggest increase in spending since 1945, is that so far the public have not reacted, right? And there are two possible explanations. One is we discovered that the state could actually be a rather useful thing, and the biggest state could be a rather useful thing. Right? Or more narrowly, but this is still important at the moment, that until and if the NHS is sorted out, about which there is record levels of dissatisfaction, they are not going to be worried about tax cuts.
That's absolutely true.
And so the truth is that, I think the mistake your party has made, and you saw it in the election of Liz Truss, is that because you found yourself presiding over a direction of public policy with which you're uncomfortable, you find yourself behind in the polls. Therefore, your colleagues have concluded the reason why we're behind in the polls is we're being true to ourselves. No. The reason why you're behind in the polls is you're not being true to the electorate. Yeah. And I would remind you, we have been here before. We again go back to the 92 to 97 Parliament. The Conservative Party, having increased taxes after the 92 election, having criticised Labour mercilessly for what it's saying about tax, in both the 1995 and 1996 budgets, reduced income tax by a penny of the pound. Did it have any impact? No. So why therefore do you now think that tax cuts is going to make a difference?
Just to keep going on that, is that an argument therefore to keep raising taxes? Are you saying it would be politically successful to increase the tax burden?
What I'm saying to you...
Can I just interrupt? Sorry. Rather than having a very long discussion about tax, which I agree is important and interesting, but it's not actually the subject that we're supposed to be discussing this evening. I really want to, if I can, just move on to this question about where the election will be fought. And principally, and it does kind of relate to some of these points that certainly that Matt was raising, which is that what is raised in his constituency may well be different to what is raised in Jess's constituency. So one of the questions I want to ask is, does a slim, and I appreciate that the definition of slim is loose in this context, but does a slim majority in the red wall equate to the same size majority in the blue wall, or is there a sort of distinction to be made regarding the type of voter and therefore the sort of likely outcome of the sort of final makeup of the Commons?
Well, look, I mean, the first thing to say is that all the red wall constituencies the Conservatives hold are extremely marginal, and they're all going to go.
Right.
Right. Look, I mean,
and is the same true of the blue
Morgan
wall?
McSweeney
A lot of the blue wall
right now.
A lot of the blue wall was eroded at 2019.
Well, look, I mean,
Brexit.
I mean, the other thing we have to realise, again, the key to an election is not just about geography. It's not just that the red. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the polls that are being done in red wall seats, they show exactly the same swing, more or less exactly the same swing as is going on in the national polls.
Right.
You shouldn't be surprised because look, this is giving you an indication of just how deep is the problem the Conservative Party face. Back in 2019, the Conservative Party won the support of 80% of those people who at that point in time were in favour of Brexit. Brexit was the thing that delivered success for the Conservative Party, not because Brexit was necessarily the most popular option, but because Leave voters united behind the Conservative Party, whereas the Remain vote was fragmented, right? Mm-hmm. The current level of support for the Conservative Party amongst current supporters of Leave, and they are now a smaller group than they were in 2019, is 40%. In other words, the Conservative Party has lost a half of the support that it had in 2019. So don't be surprised if I tell you the red wall goes. The blue wall is more complicated because, of course, the Liberal Democrats have basically decided to bet the farm on the Conservative Party doing badly. They've decided to entirely ignore the fact that they're not making much progress in the national polls. They've certainly decided to ignore the fact that a key reason why they are not doing terribly well in the polls is they've lost a whole shed load of votes to the Labour Party. The Labour Party is standing in the poll. This is a minor part of it, but it isn't just because of the success in taking votes off the Conservatives. The Labour Party has taken about 1 in 3 of the votes the Liberal Democrats had back in 2019. Most of them, by the way, very heavily pro-EU voters. So they have decided that Conservatives are going to do badly, that they can concentrate their arguments in the so-called blue wall seats, and they're basically hoping, they're just hoping the Conservative vote's going to collapse, so they'll pick them up anyway, even if their vote doesn't increase. But if they can also persuade people to vote tactically for them in the seats where they've got a chance of winning, that they can get 30, 40 seats. They can displace the Scottish National Party as the third biggest party inside the House of Commons, and will hope, therefore, to regain a prominent position. But it will be on the back at the moment of what is a very thin level of support across the country as a whole. So the Liberal Democrats are definitely playing the geographical game. Mm-hmm. They always do. And they have to.
But they would.
The Labour Party doesn't have to play
presumably in some of those.
They're not going to get any tactical alliance with me. I'm versus the Liberal Democrats. Like, they are my main opponent in my seat. And Liberal Democrats in the north of England are completely different to Liberal Democrats in the south. Bear in mind, my seat has mainly Liberal Democrat councillors and voted Brexit by 62%. Most of the Liberal Democrat councillors where I live voted for Brexit. Like, don't believe the hype about them being Guardian reading yogurt knitting. Like, where I live, people who vote Liberal Democrat are Tories. So I rely on the Tory vote staying high. In working class areas, Liberal Democrat votes are, like Green votes in working class areas, are bombarded with somebody with leaflets and just you're not the people in charge, whether that's on the council and or in government. They are just the anti-vote, which, to be fair to them, was actually where I live. If you look in police and crime commissioner elections, people will vote UKIP 1, Liberal Democrat 2nd. I'm not joking. That's the reality. That they are just the a plague on all your houses sort of thing. So that is just going to head off at the pass before anybody asks me this, if we're having a Q&A. I would never, ever, in a million years agree to some sort of electoral pact. And the reason I wouldn't do that is because I am a Democrat. And I believe that men in Westminster, and it is always men, making deals in back rooms about who will stand where and be the most, is the most anti-democratic thing. And you know what? I trust the electorate 10 times the amount that I trust men in Westminster, which is a low bar. The electorate shouldn't feel too happy. But the idea that people where I live don't know how to vote tactically, all by themselves, they are clever enough to do it for themselves.
Or they get the message implicitly, because you know what? I somehow suspect, Jess, that there won't be much of a campaign, Labour campaign in Surrey Heath or in Chesham and Amersham, in exactly the same way.
To be honest, I was never going to campaign in Surrey Heath,
exactly.
it would, Matt, I'm not going to campaign in your seat either, Flower.
But the point is, the electorate pick up that message, right? Because you're right, there isn't a formal pact, and there won't be any kind of pact.
Never. I would never sign up to it. It would make me abandon all of my principles.
But there is a de facto understanding whereby, in effect, and the parties only have to follow their own logic. Basically, where the Labour Party will want to concentrate its resources will not be in places.
You say that, John, but in my seat, the Lib Dems will come after me.
Yeah, but you're now very much the exception, right? There are very few constituencies where Labour and the Lib Dems are facing off each other.
They will absolutely come after me, and there will be no pact because, no offence, I was raised to really, really dislike the Tories. Really, no offence. I've learned that I just
I was wondering.
I was really, really raised to be don't say it. It's like a swear. But. Oh my God, on a local level, the way I feel about the Liberal Democrats makes me literally want to punch a wall.
So we're going to turn over to questions in a minute, but before we do, I just want to ask, and it's slightly picking up on a point that John sort of raised earlier, which is, where will you be campaigning? Where are the key battlegrounds for you? Is it your own seat, or are you going to be helping, particularly, I suppose I'm looking at you.
Yeah,
who are you helping? Who do you...
So I think the answer to me has always been that you've got to look after your own base first, right? On the other hand, my nearest marginal seat is Lincoln. It's not that far away. It would be inexcusable not to go and help. Geography in this instance is a real factor, because there's no point saying to someone like me, can you drive for 2 hours to go and do a thing like that? In that sense, geography is a big factor. But of course, yeah, indeed. It's low thousands, right? But obviously, the practical thing that you're going to do, and I'm going to be encouraging my own activists to do, is to say, look, if I ask you to go a long distance, they're just not going to go. If I ask you to go a reasonable distance, they are going to go. So this is just a practical, logistical thing. It's not really a sort of philosophical issue.
That's the trouble with Birmingham. My mum always used to say it's a great place to get away from. And in the current by-elections, Birmingham is literally an hour and a half from everywhere. I'm like that. I could get it. Blackpool, could get a Rotherham, could go to Rochdale, could go to Bristol, could go to Wellingborough. I am geographically close to everyone.
So
that is a bad gig.
I suppose
the people I like are the people I go and campaign
in a slightly sneaky way, I'm asking for you to say what is your sort of key battleground that you are either, in your case, hoping to take or hoping to defend?
For me, it's much more about heart, I have to say, on a personal level. My own seat, I will fight it as if I am... and, it would be absolutely crass of me to say there aren't issues in inner city seats that Labour currently hold. It would be crass. There is. And so I am... I feel very, very protective over my own particular seat at the moment. But for me, it's about the heart of the places that feel like they should be Labour. And so for me, it's the Black Country, which maybe to you I sound like I'm from there. I'm really not. But when people do a Birmingham accent, they always do this mock Birmingham accent. Literally every actor in Peaky Blinders, which is based in my constituency. That's not what Birmingham people sound like. So the West Bromwich seats, the ones that like Tom Watson's old seat, that's where the Labour Party headquarters is in our region. I have this sort of heart thing that like it was where my brothers were born and stuff. Like it can't be Tory. It can't be Tory. I can't let that stay Tory. So I will go with my heart into the red wall. Also, I'm just actually, I'm beloved in rich areas, so maybe I'll go to places where people are really rich. But yeah, I feel like I'm an asset where I sound like the people who are going to be voting.
And John, I mean, Stevenage has been sort of identified as kind of one of the key battlegrounds. It is a bellwether seat, but it's the current incumbent has a majority of about 8,500, presumably therefore well below the kind of watermark. What would you say are kind of the three most interesting battlegrounds?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I really go to at the moment and saying that when we get closer to the election, we'll probably be looking to say some seats that we've never thought of the Conservative Party ever losing. I mean, beyond that, I mean, I think so. There are two caveats to that. Caveat number one, we've already said, which is the Liberal Democrat fight against the Conservatives. The other obvious caveat is Scotland, right?
Yeah, Scotland's fascinating.
Where you do have a situation where the moment the SNP on average is slightly ahead of the Labour Party in the polls, but the Labour vote's more efficiently distributed geographically. So the Labour Party could pick up around 24 seats north of the border, which could significantly enhance its ability to win an overall majority if the polls were to narrow. But then what you also have to understand, that does therefore mean that virtually every seat in Scotland is marginal between Labour and the SNP. So I can go to Glasgow, I can go to Edinburgh, I can go to Dundee, I can go to Aberdeen, and I can find you what at the moment would potentially be a marginal seat. And that, of course, does therefore mean that it's almost at the moment the one place where the outcome is most uncertain, because if the Labour Party were to manage to make a bit further progress, they could well end up dominating Scotland's representation from Westminster. But equally, if the SNP can widen the gap a bit again, all of a sudden the Labour Party will discover that it have more seats north of the border than the two it has at the moment. But it could still find it has a relatively limited reward. So that's one place where it's in a sense it's a sideshow. In a sense, the truth is it's those two sideshows. It's the Liberal Democrat sideshow and the SNP sideshow, which are going to take place in different parts of the country, where perhaps what at the moment looks the most uncertain aspect of this election, which is who's going to come third, is going to be determined, right? Now, you may laugh.
The idea that the Tories would come third.
No, that's not the point. No, the point is it the Liberal Democrats or is it the SNP, right?
Okay.
Right, it's because of the advantage that being the third largest party gives you in terms of House of Commons procedure, particularly with respect to PMQs. The Liberal Democrats since 2015, they lost the position as the third largest party. They are desperate to regain it. The SNP,
David keeps not turning up for it.
The SNP are very, very keen to try to hang on to it. But the outcome of that proxy battle is going to happen in two areas where there will be a lot of geographically concentrated fights. But in terms of, at the moment, the broad outcome,
I think Cornwall will be interesting, just because it's pretty. And
you fancy a trip down there?
But also, I just think Labour will take some seats in Cornwall, but I think the Lib Dems have the potential to. I just think it's much more of a sort of like three-way, and also it is a bit of a different world, like as well, a bit like Scotland. It is essentially like, it has a very sort of strong identity about it. So the Cornwall, Devon bit, I think, will be interesting to look at, and I'm going to go there just because like one of my best mates lives there, and it's pretty.
It's nice.
I live in Birmingham.
Well, maybe not in November. Matt, do you have? I am going to turn it over to questions, but Matt, do you have somewhere that you're looking at as a kind of place that you're going to spend a lot of time? I know you said Lincoln. Is there anywhere else?
Well, I think Lincoln is naturally the default, if only because it.
2017.
So I've lived with. At the risk, I'm trying to be friendly, but so I've lived with Lincoln under a Labour MP, and I don't want to go back there.
I wasn't that. I wouldn't necessarily have picked that particular Labour MP. So, because I'm honest about the people I do and don't like about my own side. How do you feel about Mark Francois?
Anyway, right, okay, so let's turn it over to questions. questions. We've got one here at the front and one towards the back.
Thanks. I'm Hattie. I'm an A-level student and also a Labour activist.
Woo!
And we discuss a lot at the moment, particularly the seat I'm in, about the twinning process within the Labour Party and the process of twinning up the 2 seats. I've heard sort of criticisms and praise for it both. What is sort of your perspective on it, particularly as an MP in pretty safe seat?
I think that twinning processes, you get paired. If you like a safe seat, you get paired with another seat, and the point is that you're meant to send your activists from there. The truth is that the Labour Party membership outside of London isn't absolutely massive. Are you in a London seat?
Harrow.
Yeah. So outside of London, the members are, I know this is going to sound like manna from heaven to you, Matt, but we only have 400, 500 members in a local area, and 5% of them come out and campaign. So the idea that the answer to winning Birmingham Northfield is to send Birmingham Yardley's twinned people there, I think it's optimistic for, me to send those people there.
To what extent is it won by activists on the ground versus direct mail or phone calls?
What I have said very clearly is the air war is the main thing that matters. Yeah. However, turnout in any election, turnout does matter. And no offence to people when we knock on your door, I am fascinated to meet, especially with my own constituency, when I knock on their door, I genuinely am just there to talk to you. It is just to find out who you are, how you're going to vote. So I'm going to knock on your door on election day. I am quite honest with people. I'm like, can I have your phone number so that I don't have to knock, I can just call. That is the reality. Turnout, it does matter. It matters much more in the margin, of course. Yeah. But I can't help but live in the margin and for the rest of my life. So I will always live in the margin, like Matt. Look, I think not having any activists on the ground, the Labour Party has way more activists than the Conservative Party. Having no activists on the ground is problematic. Not so problematic if you've just got loads of money to pay for it. And the Conservative Party have recently massively increased the threshold on spending. Yeah. In the election. Now, I don't need to spend, I've never once spent the amount of money that I'm allowed to spend in my local area. But I don't need to pay someone to deliver my leaflets, because actually I have somebody on every street who likes the Labour Party / me enough to deliver it, whether they're members of the Labour Party or not. I don't need to do that. In elections, people start to rally around you, especially in an election. I did a door knock the other day. It's normally 3 of us, and 19 people turned up. We didn't know what to do with them. We'd finished in 20 minutes. I was like, woo, this is good. Because people are getting ready for the election. But activism on the ground definitely makes the sense that you are part of something and you have to keep that going all year round. That's what make people are funny, hate politicians. They're quite keen on their own one usually. And that's because activism isn't just at a general election. So a general election is an effort in civic building of this infrastructure that you will rely on throughout the year.
And how are your activists feeling at the minute?
Well, it's an interesting example. So mine's a big rural constituency. It's 4 miles. Yeah. So it takes over an hour to drive from one end to the other to mine. So
it does in mine, but only because of traffic.
So that sort of campaigning is very different. You might do a day in Boston, you might do a day in Skegness, but actually huge chunks of the vote are in the villages, in the rural areas, or all that. So it's just a very different model. And again, it comes back to sort of saying to the people who live an hour away from the bit that I want to go out in that day, for instance, sort of, will you come and help? It's just harder to get people to do that. So it's just a very different set of circumstances. And that is disproportionately true for Tory MPs than it is for Labour MPs. So it's very, very different.
If I were to drive from one end of my constituency to another and there were no traffic, it would take me less than 10 minutes.
But the research evidence academic research evidence is also that the Conservative Party finds it more difficult to persuade its activists to campaign outside the constituency that they live in. which
Because of demographics,
is a disadvantage, because the truth is you want to focus your resources on the constituencies which you think are marginal, because that's where the activism potentially matters.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm interested about low people.
Low voter turnout.
Yeah, and how that translates to some lack of policies. Thinking about sort of generation rent to get onto the property ladder, I'm interested how low voter turnout for young people impacts things.
There was an article last week based on a study, I think, talking about low voter turnout specifically from young people. I think for a few reasons, the sort of likely negative campaigns that we're sort of all braced for, the fact that neither leader seems to be particularly that kind of groundswell kind of enthusiastic.
The youth quake under Jeremy Corbyn wasn't real, was it?
Well, I know, but I'm thinking more sort of Obama and Blair type kind of.
Was there a youth quake under? I mean,
well, look, I mean,
I literally gave birth to David Barack Obama, so there was a youth quake in my life.
The other thing is ID, voter ID as well, which is
okay. There are some particular issues potentially about turnout this election. But I'm afraid the honest, brutal truth is that young people have always been less likely to turn out and vote.
True.
And in part that's circumstantial. So younger people are more likely to be in the circumstances whereby they don't get on the register or stroke they don't manage to vote, i.e. they live in multi-occupancy occupation, they've moved their residency recently, they're less likely to be in employment, etc., etc. These are all things that are associated, irrespective of age, with people being less likely to vote, stroke being on the register. But the truth is that as they get into their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, and they have a partner, or they get married, and if they're lucky these days, they might even have a mortgage, or that's getting more difficult.
Jesus, not a chance, right?
Well, exactly. No, it's exactly what I'm saying, right? But the point is, they tend to catch up with the previous generation in terms of level of turning out. Now, what is true about this? I mean, to be honest, I suspect that at the moment the turnout in this election will be low across all groups, for three very simple reasons. One is there isn't much difference between the parties, much as these two will disagree with that statement. Two, at the moment it looks to be all over by the shouting. And three, and this comes back to the earlier comment, all three principal party leaders, indeed if you include some of the use of all four, are, as I've said elsewhere, are as dull as ditch water in the eyes of the electorate. So this potentially is going to be an extremely boring election campaign led by people.
I really hope it's boring.
Led by people who don't enthuse the electorate.
Make my job harder.
And you certainly look at what happened, particularly when turnout fell very heavily in the 2001 election. That was very much linked to the fact that particularly it was very little difference between the parties, and it was so obvious what was going to happen, given Labour had already won by a landslide, and there was no evidence of the Conservative Party making much progress. So these are the kinds of circumstances that does tend to depress turnout in general, and that will also affect younger people.
In answer to your question, yes, it is the sole reason why young people are poorly served. It is the sole reason why policy.
But it is a problem for your party because.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it isn't, but there is absolutely no way that the things that young people have suffered in the last, under this Conservative government, and I've no doubt previous Labour governments as well. Although I was young under the last one, and I have to say I feel like I owe it my entire existence. I was a young mother under the last Labour government. My son just turned 18 and literally had money in the bank that had been given to him by Tony Blair, which I said to Tony Blair, if my son buys a motorbike, I'm going to fucking kill you. But the...
it was Gordon Brown, wasn't it?
Yeah, to be fair, I've got one Blair baby, one Brown baby, but the money all came from Brown. But the truth is absolutely no way the Conservatives would have made it so that young people, that old people could never claim housing benefit. Like, nobody under the age of 21 can currently claim any housing benefit. That's literally not possible. There's absolutely no way they would have made a minimum wage that started at 25 and then ended at 55 Like, they would never have done that. And yet, when I was 25, I had 2 children. Like, I didn't get a special price in the supermarket when I was buying my groceries, but I would have been paid less because the minimum wage is different for people who are younger. Undoubtedly, the single biggest thing that young people could do to make policies better for young people is vote like the over 50s.
And so you need to realise,
shit them up.
The lower turnout amongst younger people is a problem for the Labour Party now because age is the biggest demographic dividing line in our society.
But isn't it rising?
The Labour Party is no longer the party of the working class, right? That division seems to have disappeared. But age is a really important division. And it's one of the reasons why this city is now so overwhelmingly a Labour city. A, it's full of younger people, and B, a lot of them are liberal professionals, which is now the core Labour constituency. The core Labour constituency is no longer the archetypal working class voter of the 1960s. It's actually young, middle class, professional people living in London. That's the core Labour constituency.
But they are seeking to get one in a town rather than in a city. That's the Stevenage woman archetype, is the towns. This is thing that we heard a lot.
Because there isn't much left for Labour to pick up in London.
Lisa Nandy talking about towns quite a lot.
She loves a town.
She does.
I mean, as a person from a city.
Yeah.
I mean, she's also from a city originally, but she's a total town convert.
But she was banging the town drum.
She loves a town
before anyone else.
Absolutely loves.
And now the focus
I like
is
a
on
town.
the town.
I like a town. I'm not saying I'm against a town.
So one question which I did want to ask before we kind of wrap up is, should we read anything into the fact that the archetypes that I have been picking up on, not just Stevenage women, but also millennial Millie and tactical Tina, is it just because they have a nice ring to their names that they're all women, or is there actually a thing happening that suddenly female voters are more important than they used to be?
What you have to understand is this, right? At most elections, right? There's a crucial thing in elections. You have to distinguish between the structure and the flux, okay? The structure is what is the long-term relationship between demography or people's attitudes and the party they vote for, okay? So, for example, at the moment, it's still the case that if you're looking at the structure of party support, Brexit still divides Conservative and Labour supporters quite heavily, okay? On the other hand, Brexit explains very little of the flux, by which I mean the change in support since the last election, all right? It's for, it's Boris and Liz Truss, etc. And that very often, usually, the flux occurs evenly across the structure. So if a party's doing well, it will gain ground both amongst people amongst it traditionally does well, and also amongst people it traditionally does badly. Now, the interesting thing about the 2019 election was that was not true. That was an election in which Boris Johnson succeeded and persuading people that the central issue was Brexit. And that, together with what already happened in 2017, meant that indeed you got a lot of differential movement in different sections of our society. But that is the exception rather than the rule. And of course, one of the things we are looking and interested in is to what extent will the legacy, the structural legacy of 2019 still be with us or not, even if the flux now means that in terms of levels of party support, things look different. The evidence at the moment on the academic research is that the structure of the 2019 election is still going to be with us, even though the flux is basically going to emaciate all of the obvious traces of that structure in terms of the electoral geography.
Were you asking specifically, are women going to decide the election?
Well, basically, yes.
Okay. I mean, classically, women's support for the Labour Party is
a bit higher
for the Labour Party than men's support for the Labour Party, and then ergo the same the other way around.
I mean, under Boris, it must have been much higher with men. He kind of famously had a problem connecting with female voters, even.
I mean, not that many, connected with loads.
Well, but there wasn't. I mean, see, there wasn't. There was a bit of a Brexit gender divide on Brexit, but there wasn't much. And the crucial thing about 2019, it's Brexit. That's the thing.
Yeah, but I think that John already hit the nail on the head earlier when we were talking about taxation. Is that you cannot have an argument about taxation until you've sorted the NHS out. The NHS is currently, I would say, and the Labour Party is massively so the NHS and cost of living, both of which are in most cases the absolute bastion of a woman in a house. Both of those things. Your household, the way that you manage your household budget and the way that you, and how much you worry about it, actually. I'm just saying my husband literally doesn't worry about anything. But anyway, he and also the health and well-being of you people. I wish it wasn't the case, but I'm afraid to say that the vast majority of that, and they are coming out, I would say at the moment, as the two most prime issues. The most significant thing. Yeah. So do I think women's concerns, I mean, I am going to seek it to make that women's concerns are absolutely 100% the absolute forefront. And for me, that is about women's safety, which for women voters at the moment is way more of a priority than other things, than it's ever been before. And so there is all sorts of opportunities to lead people somewhere on particular issues outside of those two, which are already troubling women voters to a level that I've never seen it before.
And indeed the general public. I mean, I would argue I'd argue the question that most voters are asking themselves is, can I afford to feed my kids? And if I fall ill, will the NHS
am I going to lose my house, even if I earn a 6-figure salary? I mean, literally, that is the conversation I have with people I know who are living in, like, one of the nicer bits, admittedly, of Birmingham. We'd be living in multi-million-pound mansions if we lived where you all live. But most of my friends are considering selling their homes to downsize because they can no longer afford their mortgages. Oh, yeah. And these are people who are... like, their collective income is 3-4 times that of the average person where we live. And, like, across every strata, where you're in Surrey Heath, where there was a minister, quite honestly, ex-Minister George Freeman, who said he couldn't afford his mortgage anymore because it gone from £900 to £2,000. And I thought, Jesus, mate, mine started at £2,500. The problem is now it's £3,500. Like, that is everyone. Everybody is, and it's not the issue. It's not the issue of. It's not the issue of like. It's the worry. Everybody is in a worrying position. Men, man, woman, beast.
Yeah, I mean, in doing the course of this Parliament, if you look at Ipsos's data, we have been more consistently and deeply pessimistic about the economy than we have been at any time since 1979 when they first started doing the polling. And the problem the Conservative Party has is, we can have an interesting intellectual argument as to where responsibility for all this lies, but the problem the Conservative Party has is that all that Jess Phillips and her colleagues have to do is to pin the donkey on the Conservative Party, pin the tail on the Conservative donkey by just mentioning it's Liz Truss's fault. And that's it. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why it's so difficult for the Conservative Party to turn things around.
Right, okay. Well, I'm sorry, we have slightly overrun. Cheery. So to end on that high note, but thank you so much for coming this evening. And thank you so much, Matt, John and Jess. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Oh, thanks very much.